Hi everyone, Tony Costa here from Toronto Apologetics. I'm here with Dr. Ed Dalcour, and we are both in London, England, and we're doing some training sessions for pastors on Islam, and we're also doing a conference on Islam here in London. So Dr. Ed, it's always good to see you, and this is the first time we're meeting in the flesh.
Yes, first time in a long time that we're meeting.
Yes.
Doing a conference out here for a week. Then at least I fly to Germany. We do another conference there, apologetic conference. And if you notice, Tony, it's interesting that I like that George did this. He emphasized born again Christians.
Yes.
And I always ask, rhetorically, what's the emphasis on born again Christians?
Right.
Why born again Christians? Well, there's a big reason, especially out here.
Right.
Huge reason. And one of the biggest reasons, and the main reason why we find that phrase, is because out here you have a whole cascade.
That's right.
Of ecumenism or ecumenicalism here. And those are people who tolerate and subscribe to Roman Catholics, to Eastern Orthodox, and to other groups that clearly are not Christian because of their denial of essential theology.
Right.
They have the view that as long as you believe in Nicaea, which is an ontological conference, not a salvation conference.
A little bit about the Council of Nicaea. It's 325. It was the first ecumenical council in the history of the church. So when Dr. Ed says Nicaea, he's referring to that council, 325 AD.
And it had to do with the relationship ontologically between Jesus and the Father.
Yeah.
And they were responding to heresy.
Sure.
The function of that council was not soteriological. It had nothing to do with, it didn't have to do with salvation issues, because that wasn't the problem.
Right.
The problem was the heretic Arius denying the ontological deity of the Son. What today we have, I think it's just as worse.
Sure.
We have people denying the exclusivity of salvation doctrines. You have people that are denying justification through faith alone. I say this all the time. Scripturally, you cannot bifurcate or separate the person and nature of Christ, which Nicaea dealt with. Person and nature of Christ with his work, because they're all tied in. You can't say, I'm a Christian, I believe in the Council of Nicaea, I believe in the doctrines, the creed.
Right.
But justification through faith alone, that's a Protestant kind of doctrine.
Right.
Even though I accept them as Christians, I don't believe it. And so that's my message when I go to Speaker's Corner.
Right.
I don't have a gospel.
Right.
My gospel is refutation.
Right.
It's a gospel of refutation. The ecumenical movement is damaging evangelicalism, because what you have a focus on polemics and apologetics. And other than that, as long as you say Jesus is Lord, you're in. You're on my team.
Right.
That's damaging to the faith. The Apostle Paul wrote the opposite. His doctrine was antithetical. We know that in Galatians, Ephesians, Romans. In Galatians, he pronounced a twice curse on people who believed that Jesus was the Messiah, that believed in a lot of the facts of who Christ was ontologically. But why did Paul pronounce a double anathema to these people by divine inspiration?
Right.
Because they denied the very same thing Rome denies, the very same thing Eastern Orthodox denies, and other groups, that justification is without merit of man. It's through faith alone in Christ alone.
Right.
Now, you don't have that here with the ecumenicalists. Ecumenicalists, what you have is a merging of paganism and trying to merge that with theology, which you don't have.
Right.
It's one of the most damaging things to evangelicalism.
Right.
And I think it just tells me this, and this is the point. If you're a ecumenist, if you're one of those who think Rome and Eastern Orthodox and other groups who deny justification through faith alone, which is the only recognized gospel.
Yes, that's right.
And you think that saying Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, and that's all you need, and it doesn't matter about the other things, you're rejecting the gospel.
That's right.
So when you do polemics, say at here or at Speaker's Corner, or if you do apologetics, what in the world do you say afterwards? What do you do afterwards?
Exactly. Well, it's interesting, and by polemics, of course, Dr. Ed, you're talking about when apologetics is giving answers, giving a reason for faith. Polemics is the idea of opposing a worldview that is unchristian and contrary to the gospel. But I like what you said about the fact that Nicaea and even the Apostles' Creed They talk about the being of God, Christology, pneumatology, but it doesn't really delve into the nature of the gospel. And that is where I think the reformers recovered that. They took us back to the foundations. And the ecumenists, like you said, Roman Catholics, Eastern Orthodox, who don't hold to that gospel of grace, when you have evangelicals working in tandem with them, working alongside of them, what does that say about the unity of the church? What does that say about our fidelity to the gospel? Like you mentioned Galatians 1:6-9, and there the Apostle Paul is talking about, in context, referring to the Judaizers. Can you imagine, Dr. Ed, if the Apostle Paul worked alongside the Judaizers, because nothing tells us that they were heretics in the sense of denying the deity of Christ, his bodily resurrection. They agreed on the triune nature of God. There's nothing against that. But where they differed was on the gospel. And that's exactly where Rome and the Eastern Orthodox also do. But can you imagine Paul working alongside the Judaizers to preach to people? Would you ever think of Paul just saying, let's forget, we may have our slight differences, but we're all brothers and sisters in Christ? And can you imagine Paul working alongside of the Judaizers to bring people to salvation?
It's like him working alongside of the Gnostics. In fact, in Colossians, you don't have Paul pointing out the good things of the Gnostics. In Galatians, you don't have Paul pointing out, well, they do have these positive things. No, he hit the jugular. His concern were the doctrines that were destroying evangelicalism and rejecting the only recognized gospel, justification through faith alone. If you don't recognize that, simply you have a very incoherent false gospel. You just don't understand the gospel.
And there's something that I think you probably, I don't know if you remember Pastor Don Fry. He used to be the pastor at in Phoenix Reformed Baptist Church. He used to say, what you win them with is what you win them to. And so if we're winning them with the gospel of works, then you're winning them to a false gospel of works. But if you're witnessing to them with the gospel of grace that the apostles taught, then you're winning them to the gospel of grace. So to this ecumenism, it sounds a lot like it's compromise, really, when you think about it. And it would be like Elijah telling the Israelites, don't worry about it. I mean, God and Yahweh and Baal are just two different names for the same God. There's no need to divide over this. Let's just get along. And we're seeing the same today. And I think it's a disastrous recipe for evangelism.
It really is. In 1 Corinthians chapter 5, I mean, he talks about someone professing to be Christian. But yet they're embracing some kind of idolatry or greed, false doctrines. Paul says, don't even eat with such a person. Paul was more upset at people professing to be a Christian and denying these essential doctrines. And ecumenism is one of the most damaging things to evangelicalism, because you have no gospel. You have a false gospel. You're embracing people who embrace a false gospel, and it's destroying evangelicalism, and it's so dishonoring to the Lord. And you yourself have no idea, if you're involved in some kind of ecumenistic group or organization, you have no idea what the purity of the gospel actually is.
Right. It reminds me of the late John Paul II. Billy Graham, who's also passed, Billy Graham once said that I preach the same gospel that he preaches, that is Pope John Paul II. And of course, that was a shocking statement on the part of Billy Graham, because he's essentially saying that the gospel of Rome and the gospel of the evangelical church are the same. And we know from Council of Trent and Vatican II, etc., we know that the gospel of Rome is a gospel of works. It's not a gospel. They do preach grace, but not grace alone.
Not grace.
So that is a very important distinction.
Absolutely. And when Rome says, I believe, I would reject Rome's assertion they believe in the deity of Christ, or they believe in the Trinity or incarnation, because if you deny the work of Christ, you don't have the same Christ I have in biblical revelation, who Paul says became our righteousness. Therefore, you don't have the Christ, the second person of the Holy Trinity. Therefore, you reject, in essence, the very doctrine of the Trinity. You reject the deity of Christ because you have the wrong Christ.
Right. And so all that to say, folks, that ecumenism, working alongside of Christians in name only or mere Christianity, is a dangerous recipe, because at the end of the day, what saves people is the gospel. Romans 1:16, that the gospel is the power of God unto salvation to all who believe, to the Jew first and then to the Greek. And so you may believe in the creeds of the church, but if you have the wrong gospel, then you are outside of God's kingdom. You can't be a child of God. And so this is why we are protesting against this notion of ecumenism, because it is compromised and it is contrary to the gospel, and it is, as Paul says, anathema. So Dr. Ed, thank you so much for being part of this. I really appreciate you, brother. And please pray for Dr. Ed, as he's going to be going from London to Germany to also teach there and to build up the pastors there. So keep him in your prayers as well. So thanks for being with us, Dr. Ed. Take care, everybody. God bless. Bye for now.